Welcome everyone to the Hartford Audubon Society's presentation of The Plight of Our Birds, A Call to Action by Dr. Min Huang and Craig Repasz. This presentation was held at our regular monthly meeting on October 14th, 2025 in West Hartford, Connecticut. This presentation is just one of many events and bird walks that are hosted by the Hartford Audubon Society each year. Craig Repasz is the president of the Friends of Stuart B. McKinney National Wildlife Refuge, an organization devoted to supporting this important refuge. He is past president of the New Haven Bird Club and is currently serving as their conservation chair. He is past conservation chair of the Connecticut Ornithological Association, and he has been the volunteer coordinator for the Connecticut Bird Atlas for 6 years. Dr. Min Huang is a wildlife biologist for the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and heads the migratory bird program for the state. Min received a Bachelor of Science in Natural Resource Conservation and a Bachelor of Art in English from the University of Connecticut and received his Master of Science in Wildlife Management from Frostburg State University. He received his PhD from the University of Connecticut researching subpopulation structure and survival of resident Canada geese. Min has worked as a wildlife biologist for Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation, as well as the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife as a district biologist. Current projects he is involved with include migration and survival of North Atlantic population Canada geese, nesting success of mallards in ex-urban landscape, American kestrel survival, dispersal, and migratory stopover habitat use, American bittern habitat use and migratory patterns, eastern whippoorwill status and use of managed reforest cuts, and multi-stock harvest management of waterfowl. Our events are always open to the public, and for a complete list of events and details on how to become a member, please visit our website at hartfordaudubon.org. Thank you, and please enjoy this presentation.
Because I understand Hartford Audubon were major supporters of this Atlas project that we had. I'm sure my first experience with the Atlas was very, very similar to a lot of yours. It was late May in 2018. Spring migration was really petering out by then. And I usually bird in New Haven County and some of the hot spots throughout the state, but I was at a very new spot for me. I had never been there before. This was in the Concopontine State Forest, and I will be returning to this spot frequently over the next couple of years. So this place became known as my block. I was slowing down to watch chickadees. Usually as we bird, we might count chickadees, put it on our list and move on quickly. I was waiting to see if they would exhibit certain behaviors. I was also watching a cedar waxwing catch a dragonfly. I was hoping to see it fly off, but it shoved this dragonfly into a female cedar waxwing's beak, and I did not get the type of behavior I was looking for. I was really waiting to see if they would show breeding behavior. That was a courtship display. I guess to cedar waxwings, that's considered romantic. I was carrying an iPhone. I had my eBird up on it. I also had a mapping app that showed me where I was. And I was also carrying this scary document. My bag this whole. So this document shows when the species in Connecticut have stopped their migration and should settle down onto their breeding territories. These are the safe dates. A lot of us knew them, we loved them. It's an ugly looking document, but I walked through Concopontine State Forest with this mantra going through my head that breeding behavior trumps safe dates. Breeding behavior trumps safe dates. What that means is if I could actually see bona fide breeding material, I could ignore this document and just record that this bird was indeed breeding on this location. I was not alone doing this. See if you recognize anybody in this picture, because a lot of people from Hartford came down to this event. In fact, there were, see if you see a name, there's 916 people that either signed up to adopt blocks or have submitted data or some other survey. They contributed reports. And some of these volunteers had adopted more than one block. So I knew some people that were out to anywhere from 10, 15, even 20 blocks, just to make sure that we brought this across the finish line. We also had an activity in New Haven Bird Club. I think you also did it here in Hartford as well, called block busting, where a group of birders would go, out and spend time on a block, and they could log in 20 hours and get it done and move on to the next block. This way we could close out all these different blocks. And we would do it again in winter. We would do it twice. We would do it in early winter and we would do it again in late winter. We also had block busting where we would go get cold, counting birds, and then go warm up with some coffee at Dunkin' Donuts and go out again. Here again, with an effort like this, we could really put some of these things to bed. So New Haven Bird Club, we were going out to Morris and Voluntown. These places are far from New Haven County. It was good to see other parts of the state. So this was the Connecticut Bird Atlas. This was the data gathering stage. So not just these 916 volunteers, which was crucial in order to make this happen. There was an Atlas team that included Min Huang, Chris Elphick, Morgan Tingley. Even when he moved to UCLA, he still supported us. Myself, Sam Merker, and Valerie Steen. We also had regional coordinators. Your very own Sarah Zagorski was the one for the Hartford block. There was field technicians, and Chris Elphick also had a team of undergrad students to do their data entry and data crunching. So what is a bird atlas? Why do we do it? This one goes back into England back in the 60s. It kind of started when people started to territory map. This is some beautiful field in England back in 1922. But what do you get when you start to put a stack of maps together and bind it together? It's an atlas. So atlases could range in scope from a county like Humboldt County, or it could be an entire continent like in Europe. Sometimes they will mine old data. This was going back to 1875 to 1900 to see where birds were across the landscape. So Connecticut Bird Atlas, we first did one in 1982 to 1986. It really is a historical who's who. Who are the birds and really who are the birders? Some of the birders that contributed to this atlas are no longer with us. But it serves as a very important baseline. You need a baseline if you're going to determine trends. So around us at this time, there were other states that were working on their atlases. For example, Massachusetts had completed their second atlas. Rhode Island was in the middle of theirs. Vermont had completed one, and Maine was about to kick off their own. New York, being heavily caffeinated, they had just finished their third atlas. Whether or not we're going to need to do that is yet to be determined. Most birders have a problem with collecting too many books, which is why atlases are great, because you could have a whole bookshelf dedicated to publish atlases. So where are we with the Connecticut Bird Atlas? We started in 2018. We finished our surveys in 2022. But it's important to note what some of our goals were, and this is where we are now. We're still doing some data crunching. We're going to have the final product pushed out. More about that in a moment. But one of the important things is, because this was done as a community of birders who love birds, that upon completion, that we would take this momentum and galvanize a conservation movement to actually do something to reverse some of the trends. I'll get into the trends in a moment. So just some nuts and bolts about the atlas to refresh your memory. We took the state and the USGS topographical maps and divided each map into 6 blocks. So for example, in Sharon, there would be Sharon A through Sharon F, for example. So we had 601 blocks, a couple more than the first atlas, simply because we were using blocks that went out into Long Island Sound that may be one island or so. So a full block would be full territory. Others, like along the borders with Rhode Island and Massachusetts, would be partial blocks. Some of those were rather locked without any roads to get to, but still somehow we were able to get people in there to volunteer. So we took this grid. Morgan Tingley, who is a wizard when it comes to IT and GIS, put this grid onto our website for both summer and for winter. And you could see how it's shaded. It was divided into regionals, into regions. There was a regional coordinator for each one. I mentioned Sarah was the one for Hartford. So group by regions, but you could click on one of these maps, one of these blocks, and you would get a status of how many hours have been put in, how many birds have been seen, and also a breakdown of confirmed breeding or showing like possible breeding. And you could get a species list. You could also get maps. Here we want people to go out and get as much of the habitat as possible. So if you had a meadow and you just stuck to the meadow and you didn't go to the marshes, that wasn't good. You need to cover all of the habitats within your block. So having these maps available would help you kind of tell where the habitats were. You could also pull up a species list. It would show you breeding from back in 1982 to 86. Currently, what has been listed, because some of these areas were adopted by somebody like Hammonasset, for example. That's one of the most popular places in the state. There was an adopter, but so many people were submitting checklists from that area. So it got filled up pretty quickly, and it was more robust than just having one person do it. It also shows the early winter and the late winter. I mentioned mapping software. eBird does not have a grid system like this, so this was done in Google Earth. Google Earth could show you where you were with a cursor, and so you would not go into somebody else's block, which could kind of corrupt the data because we're using eBird for this. So the surveys, in a nutshell, you're to spend 20 hours birding over a 3-year period. The 20 hours has been determined to be a saturation point. If you go spend more time, you're not going to really have much in the way of new responses. Visit everything, visit all the habitats, list all the species seen, and try to record breeding as much as possible. So it really had us birding in times like in May, going into June and July, times that a lot of people really are doing something else and not really birding because the warbird migration is long past. But we're looking to see if we could get breeding behavior. So for example, if you have a bird singing, that's possible. Probable if you would see a courtship displayed. But if you're actually seeing fledglings, you're seeing them building nests, things like that, that's the type of behavior that we were looking for. So all said and done, we had 168 confirmed species of birds breeding in Connecticut versus 173 from the first atlas in the 80s. The winter surveys was something new. We hadn't done that before. And so this was here again, 20 hours over 3 years. But the idea was to go 10 hours in the early winter, 10 hours in the late winter. Many birders in the state go south for the winter themselves. So we were a little lack on some volunteers. So other people really stepped up to make this happen. But we also had some field technicians that were hired to do some protocols. And so they were out gathering data as well. So when all said and done, this is very impressive. We had close to 50,000 checklists with over 600,000 records. So that was an incredible effort. And many of you were part of that. So really, thank you. Wouldn't have happened without you. But there was 2 main events that happened during the survey period. COVID, which because of this shutdown, people were not encouraged to travel around the state, getting coffee and donuts and warming up or whatever. Is like, it was really to stay home, bird in your backyard, but we decided to tack another year onto it and not just have 3 years. This was something that we didn't see. Also, what came out after we started was this report that we all pretty much know. It kicked a lot of us in the gut. This was the Rosenberg paper in 2019. This came out in Science, looking at data from 1790 to the current day, that birds in North America are down by 3 billion. That's 1 in 4 birds isn't there since they started tracking this. 90% of this loss came from just 12 bird families. This includes sparrows, warblers, finches, and swallows. And it's coming from these major habitat groups. What relates to us, obviously grassland birds. We're talking bobolinks here, eastern forest birds, shorebirds, and boreal forests. So the other papers have come out since then and have attributed causes to this decline are domestic cat, either as pets that are let out or feral populations. Some estimates are around 3 billion a year in North America killed by these cats. Window collisions, something I do. I spent a lot of time with Lights Out Connecticut trying to address this issue. We lose up to 2 billion birds, as current estimates have, for birds being lost in these collisions in North America. The use of rodenticides, insecticides, chemicals on our crops and around our yards, and habitat loss. And obviously climate change is going to be a driver in this issue as well. So we need to protect our birds, but in order to protect something, you have to know where it is. So this atlas provided this data and answer that question. But other questions that we get quite a bit is, will there be a book? And what is the end product? No, there won't be a book, but the end product is something a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more interactive. It's going to be a static website. If you go to the website that we were using, it's been corrupted with some ad. I don't know what this was. I was looking for it today. We're going to be putting up another one hosted through Yukon. This is what the splash page would look like. It is going to have a list of geese, a list of birds listed taxonomically. Other features are going to be bar graphs. These are put together by Frank Gallo and Greg Hanasek. It's going to show data, the statistical analysis. So if you are a researcher, you can see how things were done. It's going to show the maps from the first atlas to our second atlas. It will provide phenological data, which are really our breeding codes. So this is for the barred owl. So you see like a lot of people were the feeding young. I guess more people in the state saw a lot of owlets being fed by their adults. There's going to be pictures of what some of these breeding codes look like, so you could see little owlets and how wonderful they look. So this would be like a guide to what the breeding code would look like for that particular species. There's going to be winter, and here again, some statistical analysis. So if you're a researcher, you can see how it was done. For each species, there's going to be a block breakdown. So you could see how with Hartford here, you can see how many birds were actually seen on the block and what they confirmed or possible breeding in winter data as well. Rarities will also be listed. So this first phase will have the block maps and other data, text and abundance maps as well. Some of the abundance maps are going to be like this heat map instead of just like, oh, excuse me, it's working now. So this is what we have seen in the first atlas. We're going to see this in the results that shows if confirmed, probable, or possible. but using some of the more modern software, we could give these heat maps. So based on habitat type, you could see this distribution, or most likely where you're going to see American restaurants, for example, where they would be breeding. So the second phase, there will be the first records and rare bird species maps and other data sets coming in. And then hopefully phase 3, I'm not sure, that's in the misty future. It's going to be expanded histories and hopefully some maps before 1950s. So what did this show? The final data, we were able to track bird population trends. And a report came out in 2025 this year, the State of the Birds Report of North America Bird Conservation Initiatives. And they have grouped breeding habitat groups. Now, changing hats here to Lights Out Connecticut, I will always argue that we could talk about water birds, seabirds, forest birds, but also what's very important habitat is the night sky. Most of our birds, 80% of our birds actually will migrate during the night. And they need dark skies to do that. They rely on insects that have, most of these insects that the birds rely on have life cycles that rely on the night sky. So I want to point out that we lose up to 2 billion birds to window collisions every year. This is non-discriminate, so most of it's going to be passerines. So when we're talking about some other birds, there's other conservation issues that we have to take into consideration. But some of the things driving these changes in the downward trends of the bird population, just to back up, this paper came out showing that we're down by 3 billion birds. Our data is right in accord with that. You know, it really supports each other. But some of the reasons, obviously, there's changing land use. We're losing a lot of our farms. We're losing a lot of our grasslands and shrublands to development, or the shrublands have turned into forests. And some of these forests are being fragmented. So you could have thrush breeding in this, but they're not going to actually produce young. Climate change is also a very big driver in this, and something that they weren't necessarily dealing with in the 80s. We just had a climate bill that got passed this past legislative session. This includes a lot of nature-based solutions to climate change. That is giving open space so nature could roll with the punches. That's more like more violent storms. We would need to have floodplains for the waters to go, dealing with runoff, things like that. So nature-based solutions is actually building habitat at the same time as protecting us. One of the other drivers is this insect Armageddon. I hear there's a discussion about an insect atlas coming up, which would be very important because this report came out with the insect apocalypse. But one of the take homes is that we do not have a lot of data. We could casually, anecdotally remember driving around New England in June and having to stop a few times to clean our windshields. That doesn't happen anymore. Like our forest birds rely on caterpillars, and our aerial insectivores are relying on beetles, mosquitoes, and moths. So these have really been impacted. So what are we losing? Here's some maps, some data. Obviously, our kestrels, grasshopper sparrows, and eastern meadowlarks are all down. You see the difference from the first atlas to where we are now. Things are starting to blink out here in Connecticut. So grassland species, as I showed earlier, is a habitat group that has been severely impacted pretty much across the continent. For shrublands, brown thrasher used to be everywhere. Blue-winged warbler, can you believe it? Ruffed grouse is almost extirpated out of the state. This is due to habitat loss. Also, forest fragmentation has started to chop things up, varies black and white warblers and eastern towhee. And if you look at these maps, one thing that you can see is that where they blinked out is our 91 and 95 corridors and the development that's been going on around them. So we're losing habitat. Also, recent literature, maybe 10, 15 years old, has come out talking about the importance of secondary habitat. For example, a lot of our forest birds will obviously need the interior forest to breed and raise their young, but then there's oftentimes wetlands that they have to go to, and the young birds will skulk around, they'll go through their molts, they'll put on fat, and then they will migrate. So we need to protect both the interior woodlands. We also have to protect these freshwater marshes so they could have that very important stage of their development. Also, some changes here with the belted kingfisher. I'm not sure why their numbers are down. Here again, there's a lot of things that we don't know. We've lost habitat for our herons. And so this is the Canada warbler. It's hard to say what's happening here. Are they losing habitat, or are they just don't have enough insects? A lot of study still needs to happen. Some of our forest birds, you see how much the purple finch has dropped off. Brown creepers, are you getting brown creepers the way you used to? Or chestnut sideds? But what about our introduced species? I don't know, you might think that this is like a Starling pizza. This obviously is a picture from Bryant Park, but some of these species, our starlings, are actually starting to blank out in certain areas. Pigeons are down. We're starting to see receding of house sparrows and house finches. Some things have been overkill, not so much hunting anymore, but historically we've lost our peregrines because of hunting. Obviously pollution is playing a part. These are the trends from the peregrine falcon, but we're seeing that this bird is actually starting to come back in a lot of our areas. So we do have some successes. Screech owls. Really, we did not get a lot of screech owl reports coming in. I was reading that one issue that we have, they have a tendency to be breeders in our backyard forests. That if there is light pollution that shines on their box, the nesting box, or the areas where they hunt, they'll leave. So if you have light trespass going into these forested areas, even if it's like a half acre block, it's going to impact some of our birds. So shade your lights. Bank swallows, they are starting to diminish. It's hard to say what's happening here. It could be because of the insect decline. Same thing with chimney swifts, kind of all this conversation talking about our aerial insectivores. Eastern kingbird has started to recede. So, but what are we gaining? Not sure why this is, but we're starting to see a lot more of these Carolina wrens. Black vultures have really taken over. I remember first birding in this state that was a rare bird that you would report. Some people think that the red-bellied woodpecker is just continuing its northern march. We've had some great success with ospreys because of platforms built along the coast. The eagle is coming back, and the raven is showing up in places, and I'm not sure we really know why. But if you look at back in 1979, we had about 20 eagles that would winter. And look at where we are now. We have 185 that was reported through the atlas. Turkeys have made a good rebound. The fish crows are doing well, even though on my big sit, we didn't get a single one that was on the coast in Guilford. Cooper's hawk, they're coming back. Is this because more and more people are having backyard feeders? And we're seeing more sapsuckers. And we are seeing more pileated. This is because our forests are becoming old enough to host carpenter ants. Mergansers are coming back. Common mergansers, they've ticked up a little bit, but there's that area in the western part of Hartford County where, yeah, they're still there, but not as much. Blue-gray gnatcatchers, oyster catchers seem to be a good success story, as well as our eiders. So at this point, we have talked about some really some bad trends that we're seeing, some mild successes, but obviously this really underscores the need that as birders that there's something that we need to do to protect our birds. And at this point, I'll turn this over to Min.
Thank you.
Let's hit that. Awesome. So, Craig just outlined some of the results that we had from the Atlas. Some successes certainly, but a lot of things that I think that most of us, when we went into it, when we went into this project, when we started talking about it back in 2016, and then we finally implemented it in 2018, we all felt that we were going to kind of see what we did see. I guess before I go forward, I'll just harp back on something that he showed us about starlings and pigeons and house sparrows. Those are generalist species, right? They can kind of survive everywhere. Traditionally, when we start seeing declines in species, whether they're birds or invertebrates, whatever, they're usually the specialist species that we lose first. And if we're starting to lose the generalists, I think that really raises a big red flag that, something is really seriously wrong out there when we have these generalist species that can kind of do well with anything when we're starting to see them decline. So we'll just keep that in mind a little bit as we go forward. So this slide might be a little bit out of place, but we've just seen a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't look so good, right? 62% of our breeding species are declining. That's what the Atlas demonstrated, 62%. There's only 29% that are actually doing any better than they were when we first collected the data back in the mid-80s. So what are some of the things that we on the local level can do to try to arrest some of the trends that the Atlas documented? Well, certainly, one of the things that Craig has, championed is, lights out and trying to reduce bird collisions. Well, that's something we can all do at our abodes, right? There's tons of great resources out there where for just a few bucks, we can actually, reduce window strikes. So there's one thing. Certainly planting natives, we've all try to do that, pollinators and all that stuff, stop using chemicals around the house. Then we can step up and start looking at the local level, right? So here you guys are, you're all part of a bird club. That's fantastic. Join a land trust. How many of you actually are part of a local land trust? Awesome, right? You guys are doing the yeoman's work at the level to protect habitat, right? Because habitat is the key to wildlife. If we don't have habitat, we don't have wildlife. Be an advocate, right? You guys through your bird club are being advocates. There's more that we can do, and we're going to try to talk a little bit about some of that. And then we can step up to the bigger scale, our state, right? So the Atlas was at the state level. To protect birds, we need to be at the local, the state, and the even bigger scale. And the biggest thing for us really is without habitat, we don't have species. How do we get habitat? Hard work, but really it comes down to having the resources, the dollars to protect and also to maintain the habitat that we have. We don't want more Walmarts. So you guys have seen this slide a couple times, but it's really, it's kind of frightening, right? So we've got all these different groups of birds that are doing really poorly, but there's a couple that are actually doing fairly well. And they all have to do, by and large, with one habitat, water, wetlands, okay? And the reason for that is, well, that slide needs to move over a little bit too. We have an advocacy group that loves waterfowl. Those are the waterfowl hunters, okay? They have put forth literally billions of dollars to protect wetlands across North America to preserve what they like to shoot. Now that may sound, a little crazy, but it actually is the key to conservation in North America, okay? It is the North American model of conservation. it's a user pay system. So the waterfowl hunters, through the North American Waterfowl Management Plan back in 1986, all right, there was vast drought in the prairies. Waterfowl were declining. They initiated the North American Waterfowl Management Plan. It has brought in literally billions of dollars across North America to protect millions of acres of wetlands and associated uplands. So who's benefited from that? Geese and swans, ducks, and also waterbirds, because you protect the habitat, you protect wildlife. Everybody else, by and large, doesn't have that advocate, and we can see what those species are doing, how they're doing. So we talked a little bit about causes of decline. I'm going to really just focus on habitat because, again, habitat is really one of the things that we can actually impact. We really can't impact pesticides. We're not going to be able to fight legislation and the big corporations and the big farms that are producing all the food. We're not going to be able to do that, but we can protect habitat. And we also have to think about habitat on a bunch of different scales, right? So habitat here in the breeding ground. So again, 62% of our breeding species are not doing well. But guess what? Craig had a slide up there. 76% of our species migrate. Okay, so 76% of the 168 breeding species we have in a state, they migrate. Where do they migrate? Central America, South America, the Gulf Coast of North America, of US. We have to protect habitat on those areas too, because they winter, they supposedly survive winter, and then they have to have nutrients and resources to make it back so that they can successfully breed and start the cycle again. So we need to start thinking about habitat protection, not only at the local scale, but also throughout the life cycle of these birds. And again, the biggest thing really is, how do we plan for the entire life cycle of these birds? So we showed a whole bunch of, really ugly slides saying, this is declining, that's declining. But ultimately, we don't know at the end of the day why these species are declining. We do certainly for some, but for others we don't. Where is that bottleneck? We like to call it bottleneck, right? Is it on the wintering grounds? Are they doing okay up here? Then they go to Central America and wow, there's no forest. They completely deforested, parts of Costa Rica, and those birds, half of them don't even make it back. But we have really good habitat for them up here. So we're actually just finished up a big study on wood thrush, looking at, wood thrush are declining across their entire breeding range in North America. But in some areas, they're declining a lot faster than in other areas. And does that have to do with where they're wintering? So there were, I think, 18 or 19 states this year, the last 2 years, who put radios on wood thrush. We were one of them, to look at where those things winter. And are they wintering in areas that still actually have pristine habitat, or are they wintering in areas where there's no habitat? So these are the types of things that we're starting to really think about and trying to protect habitat all along the life cycle of these birds. And again, we have to identify where those bottlenecks are so we can actually do something. So I like to harp on it again. Habitat is the key to wildlife. We lose habitat a whole bunch of different ways, right? So Craig had some examples of grasslands. Well, grasslands need to be maintained on an annual basis by and large, right? Or else they don't become grasslands, they become shrublands. Well, then there's a whole nother suite of birds who loves those shrublands. But again, if we don't maintain those, then they become forest. And then we have a whole nother suite of birds that love those habitats. Well, we don't have a lot of habitat left. And so we need to maintain what we have if we want to continue to have those shrubland birds, for instance, or those grassland birds out on the landscape. And then again, we really have to make sure that we curb outright loss. We don't need more strip malls. We need habitat. So how do we go about doing that, right? Let's protect what we can. I was just talking with somebody earlier about Mashamasak, right? One of the biggest contiguous chunks of forest between southern New England and northern New England. So if we can protect areas like that, then there's this whole suite of birds that are going to benefit from that. Restoration. So we've done a lot of restoration work on the coast in salt marshes. We try to do it with grasslands. If we can maintain grasslands or convert shrublands back to grasslands or convert forests back to shrublands. And then we, we have to spend time and money maintaining existing habitat. And then, Craig was talking about, the night sky being a habitat. That's part of active management too, right? Lights out. Let's maintain that habitat. On the beach, let's maintain habitat for beach nesting species and try to, minimize disturbance, things of that nature. And based on that 62% of our breeding populations are declining, we're not doing a great job. So a lot of you guys are already involved with land trusts at the local level. The biggest thing with some of the habitat protection is how can we create these corridors, right? Let's be strategic as to where we protect habitat. It's great to protect habitat, it's better than, losing it. But if we can, and this is an example from the coast, if we can, create these really nice corridors of protected land, that is the best way to do it. And that's, again, by working together, communicating and understanding where these holes are, and where we can fill those gaps. So moving forward, need to partner again to continue to try to conserve habitat. Habitat is the key to wildlife. The biggest one, again, is to find these financial resources where we can actually do active management. We can protect more habitat. There's a lot of this state that we can still actually protect and save. And we're hoping that, as Craig mentioned, we can not only use the data from the Connecticut Atlas, but we can use the momentum. So we had over 1,000 people. We showed 916, but there was over 1,000 people who contributed data. There's a lot more people, friends of the 1,000 or so, who helped, who care. And we need to come together to try to stem the tide. Because if we do another atlas, let's say in 20 years, it's not going to be 62% of our species that are declining. It's going to be more like 70, 75%. So we are certainly at a tipping point. There's really no coming back for some of these species. There's time to try to save others. But our current efforts, as much as they are great, we work really hard, they're not enough. Okay. Yeah, I forget that it's recording because I usually talk really loud. Sorry about that. And so what we are going on the road and talking about is, some type of movement where, we can come up with some type of meaningful piece of legislation that is going to provide a stable source of funding that can be used to protect habitat, maintain habitat, enhance habitat, and also to potentially fill some of the gaps as to why our species decline. So again, some of them are pretty obvious, but there's some others where it's got to kind of scratch your head as what can we do to actually reverse this trend? I was talking to some folks earlier, and I mentioned it with the waterfowl example. We have a mechanism. It was established in 1937, and it is the classic example of the North American conservation model. Why can't we come up with something similar for all the species that we do not hunt? Okay, that is the challenge that I think we face. It has to come from the grassroots. It cannot come from an agency like my agency going to our legislature and begging for money. That's not going to happen. That's not how it happened in 1937. It's not how it happened in 12 other states in this great country that have dedicated sources of funding for non-game species. And if we really care, we need to come together and figure out a way to get this done. Because, if we did have stable funding, like I say, we can do all these things with habitat. We can identify the true key limiting factors that are affecting the declines of so many of our species and maybe be able to actually do something about it. So we filled all these critical data gaps. We now know where all our birds are or where they aren't. Ultimately, we will have, as Craig showed one, he called it the heat map or whatever. we actually going to have population estimates for many of our non-hunted species that we've never had before. That's pretty cool because of all the data that we collected through this effort. But in the absence of actual money, none of this is going to matter. All we're doing is saying, hey, you know what? Back in 2020, there were this many, and now in 2040, we don't have them anymore. And again, if we don't have the funding, we really can't make the change, okay? And our kids, our grandkids aren't going to be able to enjoy what we enjoy. So I'm just going to leave with a couple of examples of what money can actually do. So American kestrels. For many years, we've got like, I don't know, 4 or 5 volunteers across this great state who have, by themselves, single-handedly, restored kestrel. We know, based on all the great work they've done, that at about $2,600 is what it takes in manpower, materials, time to fledge a kestrel, okay? So we've already taken kestrels from threatened 15 years ago to now special concern, okay? So we've got pairs all across this state. They're doing fairly well. To actually take them off the list, about $250,000 would do it. An estimate based on what we know it takes to actually fledge a kestrel. Here's a plover. So again, plovers, I had to update this actually this afternoon. So it actually costs about $1,400 to grow a plover. And again, that's time and effort on the beach, fencing nests, keeping dogs and people away from them, and everything else. To grow 600 more would take us about $800,000, okay? But we don't have that money. It does not exist. The amount of money we get for non-game wildlife in our state is $300,000 a year, okay? That is spread across all the inverts, the mammals that aren't fur-bearing, the freshwater mussels, and basically none for birds. We spend a little bit on shorebirds, but most of the non-game bird work we do comes out of my budget, which is by the hunters, okay? So we spent $750,000 of the hunters' dollars doing the atlas. We had a lot of great donations, but donations really only came out to about 20% of the total cost of the atlas. So the hunters footed the bill for the Connecticut Bird Atlas. So now the call is, you know what? Now we know kind of what the playing field is. It's not good. You know, maybe collectively we can come up with a method, a mechanism to stem the tide. So yeah, you know, we've got 48 other listed bird species. How are we going to stem the tide on those so that we're not just, hey, you know, back in the day, I remember seeing so on and so forth. And this is the one that really kills me, okay, is that common species are becoming uncommon. And that's not what we want, because what's after uncommon? Rare. What's after rare? Gone. And let's see. Oh, I'm not going to talk about any of this. This was part of the example of, you know what? Here's what we spend, you know, game money on, but we don't need to go into that. So, I mean, the bottom line is we spent 4 years collecting data. We are almost at the point where the website is going to go live. We hope it's going to go live by the end of the month. At the end of the month, you're going to be able to see all those block maps. That'll be the first part, okay? There's going to be species pages. We should have about 60 or 70 full species pages written with all the data, all the links. It's a really, really slick website. It's going to be way cool. Our ultimate hope is that, let's say in the next year, we complete all the species accounts. We have the population estimates and the predictive maps up. And then the ultimate goal for this website is that it's going to be the repository for all things bird for the state of Connecticut. It'll be one-stop shopping. And so, like, you know, right now we're going to have all these links. So you go in, let's say we want to go in and look at barred owl. Well, there's all the data from the Connecticut Atlas, the wintering stuff, bunch of life history information, and then a whole bunch of links for that one species to all this other stuff. And that'll be for all the species that we tallied in the Atlas. So pretty cool. Well, Greg and I thank you all very much. That was an enjoyable evening and we had fun.